During World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were both allies fighting against the Axis powers. During this period in time, the United States never fully trusted the Soviet Union and their communist regime, led by Joseph Stalin because of his tyrannical rule. The distrust between the two nations grew as the war ended, and the Soviets began to expand into Eastern Europe. America's distrust and enmity grew because they feared that the Soviet Union was trying to expand to control the world. The Russians became more aware of the Americans because of their interventionist approach to international relations and their arms buildup. This growth in distrust and hostility led to the Cold War between not only the United States and the Soviet Union, but between the communist threat and the non-communist world powers. The Cold War spread across the globe as countries such as China, Cuba, and North Korea began to turn to communism, and the United States failed in their policy of containment to keep communism from spreading out of the Soviet Union. The Cold War was inflamed when China turned toward communism because of their large size, with the largest population and the third largest territory in the world. When Mao aligned China with the Soviet Union, the United States began to fear the growing threat of communism that could possibly lead to further spread of communism and its control of the world. In China after World War II, there were two political factions that were fighting for control of the government in China. America's diplomatic representatives in China anticipated that civil war was to erupt between the nationalist-controlled government, headed by Chiang Kai-shek, and the Chinese communists, led by Mao Zedong. The United States attempted to avert the civil war by mediating between the two sides. General George C. Marshall was sent in for peace talks after mediation failed. Marshall also failed in his attempt to prevent a civil war in China. America could not afford to inject money or manpower into the nationalist cause to defeat the communists, but the American sentiment for the nationalists created an anti-Americanism feeling among the communists. In 1949, the communists defeated Chiang and the nationalists, which led to Mao's declaration of the People's Republic of China on October 1, 1949. The Communist Party of China, which now controlled the government of China under Mao Zedong, was an ideological branch of communism formed by Marxist-Leninist thought. Mao began to formulate his ideas of communism while at Peking University from 1917 to 1919. At the university, he learned of the October Revolution and the socio-political theory of Marxism. Mao began to discuss the theories of Marx with the head librarian, Li Dazhao, who took Mao under his wing and guided him through Marxist-Leninist thought while at the university. Mao took both Marx and Lenin's ideas and wanted to combine them with ancient Chinese philosophies so the revolutionary ideas would be more acceptable to modern Chinese people. With his background in revolutionary thought, Mao wanted to increase liberties in the provinces and create an alliance across the socioeconomic classes to create an equal communist China that accepted the proletariat as important and valuable to China. The creation of the People's Liberation Army led by Mao defeated Chiang Kai-shek and led to the creation of Communist China. In Communist China under Chairman Mao, land reforms and the creation of a government focused around agriculture dominated the lives of people. Large land holdings were taken away from the landholders and given to poor peasants. At this time in China's social history, there are a large number of people murdered who were against the government.
Killing in the name of
Mao believed that public executions would show the people that the Communist Party of China would not stand for businessmen who changed the market, nor would the government stand for intellectuals who had suspect loyalties. People in this period were forced to bow to the regime of Chairman Mao, or face being one of the many people who made the system of execution quotas. During this period, Mao wanted to create a country that was truly communist and rid areas of corruption and capitalism by beginning campaigns in which workers denounced their bosses and children informed on their parents for opposing communism and its political ideology. Aside from the dissenters, there were some people who were happy with the new government, believing the days in which the Chinese people have been exploited, humiliated, and persecuted by the imperialists, capitalists, feudalists, and the reactionaries of Kuomintang are gone forever, as stated by Mao. People sincerely believed the motherland was moving towards prosperity. For the people of China under Chairman Mao's rule, there was only one path, and that was to follow communism and turn to the communist model, which would later change as China began to follow Russia. Before China's conversion to communism, the government controlled many of the means of production because of the Chinese Civil War and the war with Japan. When Mao took over the government of the People's Republic of China, He wished to create an economy based on industrialization and collectivization. The PRC government took control of agriculture to raise the funds to industrialize the country by selling the agricultural products at higher rates than the state bought the goods. In 1953, agricultural collectives were established to help with the cultivation of land for greater profit for the government. In 1958, all private ownership was abolished and all households were forced into state-owned and operated communes. This was a forced measure that the communists used to create greater profit from agriculture to help with the industrialization of the country in a period called the Great Leap Forward. All economic reforms were centered on agriculture for the growth of the country as an industrial world power, just as communist Russia had done. To promote these reforms, there was no greater tool than propaganda and art. Under the communist regime of Mao, he believed that people in art and literature were leftovers of the old society and that they now needed to work for the people and praised proletarian socialism using realism and romanticism. Music and plays such as Yanko plays and The White-Haired Girl were all adopted by Mao as great pieces of work that focused on local folk songs and the proletariat. In 1952, Mao began a rectification movement in the field of literature and art, in which all artists and writers had to study Mao's Yen form on literature and art and examine the works of Mao, Marx, and Lenin. The artists were also meant to focus on Russia and take the Russian influence because Russia was the only ally and eldest brother. Besides only being allowed to play pieces by the Russian Five, they were also sent to Russia to study with their communist brothers. According to Mao, one of the greatest works to come out of China was a workers' song called All the Peoples of the World Are of One Heart, which was a piece that struck at the hearts of the revolutionaries. Aside from the music and literature, art in the time of Mao was mostly communist propaganda posters. Propaganda posters were meant to elevate the minds of the proletariat to show them the greatness of the country. Many of the images from 1949 show the great leader Mao with a red backdrop being followed by the Chinese as he leads them to a brighter future. These images, along with newscasts and movies of the PRC, all focused on the growing prosperity that communism would bring China. These images served to inflame the Cold War because the countries outside of China, especially capitalist countries, were made to look evil in the eyes of the communists. In the communist regime, religion was opposed as part of Marxist-Leninist ideology. During the days of communist rule, the Destruction of Four Olds campaign discouraged all religions. The Red Guards persecuted those who participated in rituals. Buddhism, which had been a large part of Chinese culture, was seen as superstition and a way for the ruling class to hold sway over the lower classes. The Chinese communists declared that God was dead, and the religions of the world were out to defile Chinese communism. In many parts of the country, the clergy was arrested and sent to camps and often forced to destroy their temples and places of worship. In the 1960s, China's policies went even further to eliminate religion in all forms. As the Cold War progressed, China grew as an economic power because of the country's growth from agricultural production, but at the same time, the country was failing culturally because China was falling further into communism, and the arts and religion were suffering because they were seen as threats to the government. What would become of China and its role in the Cold War as China furthered its communist policies and isolated itself culturally from the rest of the world? And how has China evolved from being the enemy of the United States to becoming a world power? These and other questions will be investigated in the days ahead.